Fernando Alonso is a legend. He's battled with some of the best drivers the sport has ever seen and has won multiple titles himself. However, if you compare him to the absolute best, something seems off. While drivers like Schumacher, Vettel or Hamilton have dominated the sport for years, Alonso never really seemed to be in the right place at the right time. But is he really that bad when it comes to his timing for a team switch? That is where I would like to take you on a trip through his career, from the highlights to his nightmare races. And as for every proper review on a story, we have to go back to his first days in F1, which in Fernando's case is the spring of 2001. He had just stepped up from his test driver role to a full-time seat at Minardi, and he wasn't the only rookie for that season. He was accompanied by names like Raikkonen or Montoya. However, among all of them, Alonso was the one with the lowest expectations, not because of his skills behind the wheel, but because he was driving in a Minardi. This team had already inherited its trademark as one of the slowest teams on the grid for some years, and so it was no surprise to anybody that Fernando was nowhere that season. But he had done enough to catch the attention of one guy, and that was Flavio Briatore. He offered him a role as a reserve driver for Renault in 2002, which he obviously took, because even a role as a reserve driver for Renault was better than another season at a slow team like Minardi, and this decision will prove itself to be the right one, because when Jenson Button left the French outfit to join Williams in 2003, the Spaniard was called up to replace him. Finally, Alonso had a proper opportunity to show what he was capable of, to show that he was just as fast as Button, and it didn't take long for him to do so. In just his second race, he took pole position, making him the youngest pole sitter in F1 history, and just 11 races later at the Hungarian Grand Prix, he took his first win for the team, making him the youngest winner in Formula 1 since Bruce McLaren in 1959. And this win raised everyone's eyebrows, because now the whole paddock knew that he was someone that was capable of fighting with the big boys. And at that time, this meant going against the almost unbeatable duo of Schumacher and Ferrari. The pair had dominated F1 for the last 3 seasons, and it didn't seem like they were going to stop soon. But now Fernando knew that he could beat them. The only problem was that Schumacher was still Schumacher, one of the best drivers of all time, and that he would still be fast enough to secure the championship. But in 2005, things started to change. A set of regulation changes saw the FIA ban tyre changes during the race to lower cornering speeds and to improve safety. And while Michelin was able to produce a compound that could live up to the task, Bridgestone was struggling to keep up with them. And so Fernando, who ran Michelin tyres, had a clear advantage over Schumacher's Ferrari, who ran on Bridgestone tyres. That, along with a strong car from Renault, gave Alonso the possibility to have a mega start to the season. From the first 7 races, he won 4 of them, and in the entire season, Alonso would only finish 3 times off the podium. He was just too good for anyone to stop him that season, even for Ferrari and Schumacher. And so when he crossed the line in Shanghai to take his 7th win of the season, he would become the youngest champion in F1 at the time. He was the one that stopped the Ferrari-Schumacher dominance, something that a lot of people had been anticipating for years. So understandably, he was now the driver to watch for 2006. And even though it was a closer fight with Schumacher throughout the season, in the end, he was still able to secure his 2nd title. This was the perfect place, and it didn't seem like he would have to change anything for the next season. But when Ron Dennis, the McLaren boss at the time, offered him a drive for 2007, he couldn't let that chance slip, and so he signed for the working outfit. And at the time, this move seemed reasonable. He was one of the best drivers on the grid, and McLaren, even though their car was pretty unreliable in 2006, was still one of the best teams on the grid, so he was expected to be the clear title favourite, especially since his teammate was a rookie that McLaren had promoted from F2. The problem for Fernando was that McLaren hadn't just promoted any driver, but a guy called Lewis Hamilton, and he was about to show what he was capable of. In the first 9 races, Hamilton finished on the podium in every single one of them, giving him a comfortable lead in the championship. This made Fernando furious. Who was this kid to take away his chance for a 3rd world title? So the tension grew and grew until it reached its climax at the qualifying for the Hungarian Grand Prix. With 2 minutes and 30 seconds left on the clock in the final part of qualifying, Alonso pitted for a fresh set of tyres to get his 3rd and final try. He was 2nd behind Hamilton, who was now waiting behind Fernando in the pit lane to get his new set of tyres for the 3rd run. The team held Alonso for a few seconds to give him the perfect spot on track. But when the team raised the lollipop to let him go, Alonso stayed in his spot. He knew that there was not much time left on the clock, and that, if he stayed in the pits for a few seconds longer, Hamilton wouldn't be able to get in his 3rd try. And after around 10 seconds, Alonso finally drove off. but with only 1 minute and 30 seconds left on the clock, there was not much time left to set a lap. Alonso was able to start his final run with 2 seconds left, while Hamilton missed out by 5 seconds. And in this third try, Alonso was able to take away Hamilton's pole. This split the already very disrupted McLaren team completely. You now had a situation in which the two sides of the garage were full of mistrust of each other. Nobody would believe a word the other party would say to one. And while this already seemed pretty bad, it was about to get much worse, because around that time, rumors started to come up that McLaren was involved in a spying scandal with another team. Apparently, ex-Ferrari and now McLaren employee Nigel Stepney had passed confidential technical information from Ferrari to McLaren. This was a huge accusation against Stepney and McLaren, but after the Italian Grand Prix, the FIA decided that McLaren would be banned from the Constructors' Championship, while Alonso and Hamilton could still keep their points in the Drivers' Championship. And on top of that, McLaren had to pay a $100 million fine, the highest in the sport's history. This, together with the very disrupted situation in the team, was enough for Fernando. He wanted to leave the team after the season, but he was still in the championship fight with Hamilton and Raikkonen. It was close all season, and it culminated in the final race in Brazil. Hamilton led by 4 points ahead of Fernando and 7 points ahead of Raikkonen. Alonso gave it absolutely everything, but in the end, Raikkonen was snatched the title by 1 point. This was the first time for Fernando to lose the championship in the last race. But for now, Alonso just wanted to leave McLaren and get back to the success he had before. But when he signed up with Renault for 2008, he had to accept that things had changed since his departure from the team. The car just wasn't as competitive as it had been before. It seemed like Fernando was a bit blinded by the success he had with the team before. Apart from a few podium finishes, it was a season to forget for him. Unfortunately, he was also involved in the famous Crashgate scandal. Here, Renault was accused to have told Nelson Piquet Jr. to crash on purpose at the Singapore Grand Prix in order to allow Fernando to win the race. To make it quick, pit stops under the safety car were back then illegal, which meant that if you pitted under the safety car, you would take a penalty. This gave Renault the idea that Fernando could pit just before Piquet would crash and cause a safety car, so that everyone else would have to go into the pits, take a penalty, while Fernando would be in the lead and cruise to a victory. Fernando would keep his win because Nelson Piquet Jr. only confessed the plan the year later. But I'm not going to go into any more details because this would take up way too much time and would deserve its own video. Let me know in the comments down below if you would be interested in a separate video about the topic. However, even with such occasional highs, Fernando wasn't happy with the season. And the same holds for 2009. The car was even slower and Fernando struggled to get into the points regularly. So Fernando had to change the team again in order not to spend the best years of his career in an uncompetitive and slow car at the back of the grid. Fortunately, Ferrari was in search of a driver after Raikkonen had left the team. But that move was also a bit risky. Ferrari hadn't been the best team last season and nobody knew if they could pull off a comeback. And so when Alonso came across the line to win the opening race in Bahrain, it must have been a big relief for him. However, this season proved to be quite close. Several drivers stayed in the fight for the championship until the end, with Fernando leading the standings for the final race. At that point, 4 drivers could still win the title, with Alonso, Webber, Vettel and Hamilton. On Saturday, Vettel got pole ahead of Hamilton and Alonso. At the start, the top 5 came away well, and so no position changes happened. On lap 12, Webber, who Ferrari saw as the biggest competitor for the title, pitted after he had brushed the wall. So Ferrari and Alonso agreed to come in 4 laps later in order to cover the early stopping Webber. He rejoined the race ahead of Webber, who was now stuck in traffic. Now, Fernando had to pass the slower cars ahead of him in order not to lose the championship to Vettel or Hamilton. He moved the field up steadily until he came up to the Renault of Vitaly Petrov. The Russian had pitted after a first lap incident, and now he wanted to hold on to his tires until the end of the race. But despite Fernando having fresher tires, he couldn't get past him. Lap after lap, he tried again and again, but to no avail. And so when he crossed the line, the unimaginable had happened. Vettel, who had never led the championship before, won the race, while Alonso finished in 7th, giving the German the title by 4 points. This was unbelievable. It had happened again. Alonso lost another title at the last race, and this time it was only because he was too fixated on covering Webber. But what was promising, if you want to see anything promising in this situation, was that Ferrari could bring up a strong package that could go for the title. But these hopes were crushed by the RB7. Red Bull completely dominated the 2011 season, with Vettel driving in his own league while everyone else was struggling to keep up. And for Fernando, this meant that he would only win the British Grand Prix this season. So now all that was left was focusing on the 2012 season. And this time it would turn out to be a proper fight for the title. By the halfway point of the season, Alonso led the championship by 40 points, having finished on the podium 6 times. All of this while driving in a car that was like walking on a tightrope, as he said himself. However, in the second half of the season, Vettel could catch up and overtake the Spaniard, building up a 13-point lead before the final race. For the second time in 3 years, Alonso could win the championship in the last race. And even though the odds were not in his favour, he could still win the championship if one or two things went his way. But I guess he didn't expect to see Vettel get spun on lap 1 while he would get into second place. It finally seemed to be his year. How could Vettel ever come back to the front of the grid with a damaged car? All he had to do was drive normally and to not make any mistakes in these tricky conditions. But while he was doing that, Vettel was on a run. He put in one of the best drives of his career, passing cars left, right and centre and getting closer and closer to Fernando. The final few laps came around when Paul di Resta crashed his Force India, ending the race behind the safety car. Fernando finished second. He had done everything he could do. All that mattered now was where Vettel was going to finish. He would come home in 6th place, giving him the much needed 8 points to win the championship by 3 points. This was heartbreaking. He had done everything right, not even a single mistake. He even had luck on his side, but it still wasn't enough. It almost seemed like it didn't matter what he did. He wouldn't have won anyway. And this famous picture of him after the race says it all. You can see the perplexity and emptiness in his eyes. He does not know what else he could have done. Up until now, this was the absolute low point of his career. And in 2013, it wouldn't get much better because Red Bull would dominate the season once again, giving Vettel his 4th title. So he once again had to hope for a better car next season, especially since there were some regulation changes for 2014, which could change the power of balance. However, Ferrari didn't deliver. Their car was very hard to control and just too underpowered to keep up with the dominant forces of Mercedes with Hamilton and Rosberg. And after that season, he had had enough. He had come very close to the title on multiple occasions, but never won it. And now that Ferrari had brought up a package that wasn't competitive for the new regulations, Fernando wanted to try a new challenge with a more competitive car. And if you look back at it, you can say that the move to Ferrari was the right thing, but it didn't work out in the decisive moments. So Fernando was once again looking for a team, and so when McLaren approached him to take on one of their seats, it didn't take long for him to sign. It seemed like a good move for him once again, because even though the team had finished behind Ferrari last season, they were running on Mercedes engines, which were the best engines in the entire field. The only problem was that McLaren would switch from Mercedes to Honda engines for 2015. The Japanese not only wanted to make a comeback into F1, but also wanted to bring back the success they had with McLaren in the late 80s. But their return would turn out to be a nightmare. The engine was not only very underpowered, which made the car very vulnerable on the straights, but also extremely unreliable, which made it hard for the drivers to finish in the points. And now Fernando's frustration was so high that he couldn't keep it to himself anymore. There are multiple radio messages that state Fernando's frustration to the team.
The engine was going much slower than before. Amazing.
But despite this bad season, he stayed at the team. It would get a little bit better for 2016, but the pace was still only good enough to compete in the midfield. But in 2017, McLaren was once again one of the slowest cars on the grid. He would experience multiple DNFs due to unreliability of the car, sometimes even before the race started on the formation lap, like in Russia. This was not what he wanted to do. He didn't want to spend his time to fight about a 15th place. He wanted to fight for podiums and wins. And so when McLaren offered him to take part in the Indy 500 instead of the Monaco Grand Prix, he took the chance. This was something completely new for him. He had never driven in an oval before, let alone in such a fast car as a modern Indy car. Nonetheless, he was doing pretty well. He performed well in all test sessions and was able to qualify in P5 for the race. It was looking like he had an actual shot to win the Indy 500 in his first try. He had a relatively slow start but was able to fight himself back up again to 6th by lap 19. By lap 37, Alonso took over the lead, for which he battled for with his teammate Alexander Rossi for a few laps. On lap 53, the race was red flagged after a massive crash, giving Alonso the possibility to take a free stop. From here, Alonso was able to keep up with the leading pack, holding himself in a position to go for a late move for the win. But on lap 179, just 21 laps before the end, his Honda engine gave up, taking away his chance to win this prestigious race. It seemed like he had taken his engine problems from F1 over to America. Once again, Alonso had done everything right, but it wasn't meant to be. He would take part again in 2019 and 2020, but never won it. And so, he would come back to his underpowered McLaren without a trophy from IndyCar, where he would again fight at the back of the grid. For the rest of the season, it wouldn't get any better. And even though the start to the 2018 season had been strong, overall, it was still another season to forget for Fernando. So he once again started to take part in other events during the season. This time, McLaren and Toyota agreed to let Alonso take part in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Here, he would finally encounter some success again, as he won the race with his teammates Sebastian Buemi and Kazuki Nakajima. Finally, he was still able to show that he could still perform on the highest level. But despite the success, or maybe just because of it, Fernando wanted to leave F1 after the 2018 season. He was sick of his slow McLaren. He wanted to focus on other series in which he was more successful, and so he would take part in WEC, IndyCar and Rally Dakar for the next years, with success in the first one by winning the 2019 drivers' standings. However, there was still this fire inside of him. He still wanted to compete in the best and most competitive racing series in the world. So Fernando started to check his options for a comeback. And when Ricciardo left Renault for McLaren in 2022, his comeback was sealed. This was a good opportunity for him. He was able to take part in F1 again, even though Alpine wasn't the fastest car, but he also wasn't the youngest driver anymore. And nobody knew if Fernando could keep up with drivers that were 10 to 15 years younger than him. And so everybody was highly anticipating his first results back in F1. And when you look back at it, you can say that it wasn't so bad. The car wasn't a title contender, nor was it a complete backmarker like in his McLaren days. It was a solid midfield car with which he could score points on a regular base. But there were also moments in which he showed his full driving class, like in Hungary, where he kept off Lewis Hamilton with a defensive masterclass in order to allow his teammate Esteban Ocon to win the race, or in Qatar, where he was able to get his first podium in 7 years. These moments showed that Fernando still had what it takes to compete in F1. So when Alpine only offered him a 1-year contract extension, he was shocked. He had shown that he still had what it takes, and he wanted a long-term agreement since he wasn't keen on leaving the sport. And since Alpine wasn't ready to give him such a deal, he left the team after 2022 for Aston Martin. They gave him his multiple-year contract with a perspective for the future. Because of the money of the Stroll family, the team could be a title contender in a few years' time. And when Alonso finished on the podium at the season opener, it seemed like he had made the right move. The car was a regular podium contender in 2023. He would finish in the top 3 7 times this season, giving him P4 in the standings. Unfortunately, since then, the car's pace had stagnated and he dropped down the field more and more. And that is where the trip ends. So, what did we learn from the last couple of minutes? Well, one thing is for sure. Alonso is seen as a legend of F1 by many people inside and outside of the paddock. I don't think there is anyone that would say that Alonso's public reputation is overrated. Sure, not all of his moves turned out to be good, and he might have won a few more titles, but he is still one of the best drivers the sport has ever seen. He has fought and beaten some of the legends of F1, giving us fans some spectacular races to watch, and he is still driving at such a high level at an age at which most drivers would have probably retired. That is what makes Fernando Alonso a legend of F1. But what do you think about it? Do you think Alonso has gotten the maximum out of his career? Or do you think he could have done some better moves to gain more championships? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, feel free to subscribe, and until then, I'll see you next time.